Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chris Riley with System Source. I'm joined today by Dave Ferg, one of our senior consultants. Many of you have had the pleasure of working with him on probably some of your projects. So we hopefully are going to have a lot of good information here for you today. So as we talk about best practices for securing your Microsoft Azure Authentication, today's webinar is kind of one in a series of Azure-related, Azure security-related webinars. So hopefully you're getting a lot out of those. If you have interest in any of our past sessions, just let us know. You can put that on your evaluation at the end. We'll be happy to send you the recordings and the decks for those. And we also have some ones that are upcoming as well. So why don't we jump in a little bit here? And hopefully you've got some pizzas coming your way. But let's starting with the agenda. I'll do a few introductory remarks, and then Dave will jump into his information. So we'll be looking at things like passwords and passwordless logins, looking at authentication, looking at privileged identity, as well as looking at protecting third-party identities, and then how do you monitor all of these various pieces. So there's so many aspects to the diamond that is security for Azure. We'll be looking at these facets today. And then at the end, there will be a Q&A, and I'll talk about that in just a few moments. So hopefully you have your pizza in front of you and you're enjoying that. If you requested a pizza, however, if the pizza does not make it your way or there's any other issues, you can reach out to Julie Dellinger. Her email address is on the screen. Sometimes you just need to give them a couple extra minutes in case you're trying to find your address, or your if you're working from home, or your office. If you're at the office, a lot of times the inside doors are locked, so you may want to check on that. Perhaps you'll see a delivery driver on the other side of that door if you haven't seen your pizza. But always reach out to Julie. She'll be happy to help. Okay, during the webinar, a little bit of housekeeping. So during the webinar today, the audio is in presentation mode, so you'll be able to hear Dave and me during the session. But we won't, unfortunately, be able to hear you. But we do that so that any either music on hold or noises that may be at where some of the participants may be don't come through to the whole group. However, you can reach me at any point through the chat tab, as well as through the questions tab. In fact, I talked about the Q&A coming at the end of the session today. So if you can just drop your questions at any point into the questions tab, I'll go ahead and then read out those questions to Dave at the end so that he can respond to your questions at that point. Or if we can't get to all the questions at the end, having in writing allows us to then be able to respond to you afterwards to make sure that you get the information that you need to make this a good use and investment of your time today. This presentation and the recording is being recorded, and we'll make that recording and the PDF of this presentation available to you. That'll come to you right to your email box later today. And then finally, there is an evaluation. If you can take a moment, it takes literally probably a minute or a minute and a half to just do that. You'll get that after today's session. Lets us know how we did. Also, there's a number of options there for different resources you might find valuable, and we'll be happy to send those your way. You'll just let us know what's useful to you. And we try to keep that fun. We'll take those completed evaluations, and then we will do a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card, the gift that always seems to fit. All right, just a little bit about System Source for those that may be newer to us. So we've that 43 years up in the upper left-hand corner is real. We've started in 1981. And there's about 70 of us at System Source, and we work with IT professionals from South Central Pennsylvania all the way through Central Maryland and down into the Washington, D.C. area. And a lot of folks first come to us when they need to acquire new technology. So while we do work on in-user computing side, laptops, desktops, printers, the bulk of what we do is happening in the data center, whether the traditional on-prem data center or its various cloud or other locational variants. So Microsoft Azure being the primary place, also do work in Amazon Web Services, colo centers, software as a service, other kinds of hosting centers. So kind of regardless of where your servers, storage, infrastructure, wherever that may live, and it could live in all of those places from on-prem to all of those various cloud or other location variants. We kind of help design solutions to go where it makes sense for those, for a particular client to do design, installation, security, obviously, as well as support for all of those types of locations and technologies. So we're going to be working with folks like Hewlett Packard Enterprise, Arctic Wolf for security, Barracuda for security, Cisco Meraki, VMware, all the Amazon Web Services piece. So we're going to be working on all the Microsoft stack. So all of those vendors and many more to kind of design those solutions to put in place. But people are designing or acquiring because they need to improve. And so we've talked a little bit about consulting and cloud services. Other areas that people are using to improve is in training. There will be some kind of specific Azure-related training offers later in the session today. But our training organization has 600 plus courses at any one point, all available remotely or in our facility. And that's going to be on all the technologies, as just mentioned here, in vendors or manufacturers, plus several dozen others, all available on our website. Present is our code word for professional AV. So think digital signage, Teams rooms, Zoom rooms, WebEx rooms, so all the large monitors, projectors, microphones, speakers, building those types of things into the room, into the tables, all that type of work happens right in our presentation systems group. And finally, we maintain all these things on either a reactive basis, service and support. You call us when things go bad. That can be during business hours or 7/24, whether you have a contract or not, just follow the voice prompts after hours. Or managed services, where we are the IT department for dozens of organizations. And that's System Source today. So a number of upcoming webinars. So many of these are security related. So if you're here for security, these may be of interest for you, starting with next week, next Wednesday, staying ahead of the hackers. So kind of looking at where are the hackers busy and how can we try to put up better defenses there. May 1st, so next Thursday, if you have VMware, you probably want to be at this one. You're probably aware that VMware has had price increases. They've done it again, thanks to Broadcom. So we want to take a look at kind of giving you that quick update, plus what are your alternatives? If you haven't seen some of what your renewals may be, thanks to Broadcom, you may want to really look into this session. Then we have another one coming up on Microsoft Azure Infrastructure Security on May 8th. Then looking at Power BI on the 14th, and then rounding out on the 21st with looking at cybersecurity claims. So what steps can you take to make sure that any cybersecurity claims are paid in full, as well as before that you can minimize premiums. So there's some new information that we think that will be timely and needed in that session. And with that, let me go ahead and hand the reins over to Dave, please.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you all for joining us. As Chris mentioned, as you saw in the title slide, we're talking about identities, how to protect your authorization, the accounts themselves, your authentication, all of these things. So we're going to give an introduction to that a bit today. It's a little too big to try to capture in one bite, so we're going to get a good ways down the path, and at a later date we'll pick it up and do some more in the near future. So second here, there you go. Okay. All right, so when you're talking about account security, there's a lot to think about here. There's everything from administrative controls, who can make changes, who can manage, who can add, who can delete, who can modify, those types of things. So that's an aspect of account security. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time with that today. I'm really dealing more with authentication, just to kind of level set for you here. But administrative controls are clearly a part of account security. Lifecycle management. I don't see so much today. I think people have gotten far better at it, but there was a day when I would show up at a client site and I would see accounts for people that had gone 2 years previous, still live and active in their system, because there was no process to not only activate them and monitor them during their use, but then to get rid of them when they're done. So lifecycle management is important because these accounts are just floating out there. They're valid accounts to make attacks against your system. Auditing. This always gets a little short shrift on things, and it should get a little more attention. We need to know what's going on in our world. There's a lot happening in our IT infrastructure today than it was even 10 years ago, and just keeping up with what's happening is difficult. So we need a good audit program to know if things are happening the way we intend them to happen. So that's all part of account security. Authentication. is another part, and that's where I'm going to spend most of my time today. But these are, who are your identity providers? Is this your AD? Is this your Entra ID? Is this a third-party directory service? Are you federating your directory services? Are you doing single sign-on? Where's the authentication actually occurring? Or is it happening in multiple locations? You have an authentication in AD and a separate authentication happening in Entra ID, maybe using the same account structure, but it's a separate authentication. Maybe then you do a third authentication to some SaaS application. So all of those locations are identity providers then, and you have active authentications going on in those worlds. When and where are people required to authenticate? Now, of course, we're all aware that initial authentication when you first log in, but maybe you want to prompt for logins when sensitive information is being accessed. Or over a period of time, you want people to re-authenticate to make sure that they're still active and using the sessions that have been opened. So that's another part of identity security. How? What methods are you using? What forms of multi-factor authentication are you using? It's not, are you using multiple? It's what type are you using? That's really where we need to be today. Are you everything from, are you allowing SMS texts? Or are you doing certificate-based? Are you using the Authenticator app? What is it you're using? And of course, SSO, Entra ID, gives us capabilities of doing single sign-on, not only with AD, but also with many third-party applications, so that we can control where the authentication happens and where accounts are managed from. So it's in an automated fashion so that you could create an account in one place, let it distribute out to others, and then on the reverse, the person leaves, you disable the account, it disables it out for all the others. And these are just some of the categories. I guess I could go on for a few more, but I just wanted to set the boundaries that identity security is a lot of things, and we're going to be touching in and out on a few of these things today. But let's start with passwords, because we're all familiar with passwords. Most of us are, I'm going to say most of us are still using passwords, but they're becoming a low security option compared to what we have available to us today. As you can see in this diagram here, your passwords are in the lower right-hand corner. They're convenient. Well, I'll say convenient. We all get tired of 17 passwords for 17 apps, and I don't know, which one is which, and the security issue there is then people start setting the same password across systems, or they write them down in an unsecure manner, not using a password manager or something like that. But that's where password sits. Now, what we really want to be, at least for now, I mean, I think the minimum today is in that upper left-hand corner. We want at least passwords with two-factor authentication. That's where you should be today. It's a little less convenient because you're not only entering user ID and password, you're doing a third thing by entering the multi-factor authentication. So that's why it's considered a little less convenient. And then you can move over to passwordless, which are using multi-factor authentication technologies to avoid having to actually enter your password. So it's becoming, again, more convenient, but staying more secure, and it's identifying you better than just your username and password. So some of the challenge you have for password security, and I'm going to say nothing new in this next slide. I'm sure you're aware of them all, but let's just kind of play it quickly. Clearly there's phishing and sniffers and all kinds of things out there, but phishing is the one that we're most concerned with because it attacks the weakest link, which is our people who are busy and distracted and are just clicking away, just trying to get messages to go away, and will click on things that ends up giving away things they're not even aware they're doing. So that's a danger with passwords. Through phishing attacks, people can have people can steal our passwords and now gain access to our systems. Of course, there's cracking and brute force methods, and there's online cracking and offline cracking. Recovery systems can be compromised, tricking people, much like a phishing attack, to go into the recovery system and start entering their information. Pure educated guesswork. Reuse of passwords. This is the one I was just briefly mentioned before. This is a big one because people will reuse their passwords to cut down the number of passwords they need to remember. So you really need to train your users not to reuse passwords, especially between non-work and work systems. That's where you want to at least draw the line right there. And of course, the use of default passwords. Now, many systems are automatically blocking those now, but these things still exist. I still have gone on sites for appliances more than anything else, and I've still seen the default password set on devices. So that's still out there, and it's not laziness on anybody's part. What's happened is you've forgotten that those things have happened, that they're still there, and because you don't log into them typically, you forget that kind of stuff is there. And I don't see this too much anymore, but I see it now and then. Passwords are embedded into scripts that you are using for automation, sometimes into code, but mostly into scripts. You put a password there, so it will just run. Yes, it's convenient, but now that file is a security risk for you. So these are all the issues you have with passwords. So what do we want to do with that? What do we want to do with passwords to kind of protect those? Because we're still going to probably use them for a while. There's still going to be systems that require to use them. You probably have some legacy things that may not be as modern security aware as you would like. So passwords, Microsoft's recommendations can be found at that URL that I'm posting up there right now. But here's the summary of it. They recommend that you keep a 14-character minimum password length. How many people remember the 4-character passwords? Am I dating myself? I hope not. Anyway, 14-character. Don't require composition complexity. Now that, if you've been in the industry for a while, that actually may trick you a little bit, because that's what complexity was designed for, was to make your passwords more secure. But what they found is people don't remember them, so they write them down. They have them in notepad files. They have them everywhere so they can remember if it's at an exclamation point or something else. They're talking more in the site using phrases and things like that for your passwords so that you can easily remember them, not have them anyplace else but in your mind. Don't require a mandatory periodic password reset. Now that one was counterintuitive when I first read that years ago. But what they've learned in their studies is the more you ask them to change passwords, the weaker the passwords get, the more predictable they get. Ban common passwords. We're going to talk about a tool that will let you do that today, but you want to make sure that the old Microsoft training one of PA $W00RD is not being used into your system. Educate your users about the reuse. That's a recommendation. And enforce registration of multi-factor authentication. It is this multi-factor authentication that is at the foundation of everything I just already mentioned. The reason they're saying don't require complexity and don't require password resets is because they want to use multi-factor authentication as the protection. So they want to make passwords easily remembered, usable for users, and then protect it with multi-factor authentication. You don't do multi-factor authentication, many of those recommendations up above there really don't apply at that point. And then enable some kind of risk-based multi-factor authentication challenges. And then we're going to talk about how Entra will allow you to do this, where you are triggering in multi-factor authentication in addition to the initial login, because there is some perceived risk from the login account. And we'll get into that a little bit more later in a bit. So what does Entra offer you? Well, in the password protection realm, they offer you the password protection. So this is where you can build your lockout windows and durations. And here's my custom banned list. So you can build lists of words you do not want to be used in your organization. What should be in those things besides the word password? Well, many times things that are related to your industry might want to be in there, because people will be using product names and things like that. So you want to kind of build a list of things that are common to your industry and your particular business, and maybe ban them out so they're not being used. Do you want this to reach down into Active Directory? So we can enable this into Active Directory so that Active Directory is checking with this policy before it's allowing password resets to happen. I'll show another slide in a minute on that one here, or image here. And what mode do you want this tool to run into? Do you want to first maybe start with auditing and see what you have going? But then you can also then kick it into enforced, where you want these policies to actually block things that are outside of the policy. So, if you're implementing, start with audit, go to enforce. But if you implement the Active Directory, what happens is there's a proxy service that it puts on your system and an agent that it puts on your system. And these are to communicate with the policies up in Azure, so that I'm a user, I change my password, I hit the domain controller, and when it goes to validate the password, in other words, what is it meeting my policy, the agent is going to pass the request to the proxy, which is going to pass the request up to Entra to download the password policy so that it can validate the that I'm staying within the credential requirements, and then it will allow the password change to happen. So what I'm defining here can be pushed down into my AD, and those things can manage as well. So they have a tool to help you reach down into AD and set these policy parameters as well. So what it's doing is Microsoft is slowly moving a lot of your controls up into the Entra area, even for the Active Directory. Authentication methods. Let's talk about some of those. So this is up in Entra. Entra, you're looking at Entra ID. We're looking at authentication methods and policies here. And this is where you have a list of all the different types of things you can use besides user ID and password for authentication purposes. Do I want to use passkeys or the Microsoft Authenticator or SMS or temporary access passes, et cetera, et cetera. This is where you can enable them for all users, some users, disable them, so that when people are registering for their multi-factor authentication, they're only going to see the types of multi-factor and alternate authentication methods that you are going to allow them. So, multi-factor authentication, do I want to use Microsoft Authenticator? Yes, I have that set for yes, but I don't want SMS in my environment. So when I get prompted to register, SMS options don't come up to me. Voice in this particular screen, voice call would not come up to you as an option. So I can't give a phone number to say, hey, call me and check. And again, notice in this third target column here, this is where, do I want this apply to all users? Do I want this to apply to a group? So maybe you do have a group that you'll allow SMS because they're not dealing with sensitive information. They're more of a frontline worker type of thing, and you're okay with that. That group of people can use SMS, but I move up into, let's say, accounting, and SMS disappears as something available to me for my authentications. Enable you to, the methods you want when they register. I've already mentioned that. And again, you can do it by groups. You can do it either by all users, as you can see here, or select groups, and is this going to be allowed for authentication purposes? So these are the different methods that you can allow or disallow into your environment. They also have something called authentication strengths, they being Microsoft and the Entra ID. And this is the collecting together of authentication types that have different strength characteristics to them. You can have basic multi-factor authentication, and there are multiple ways that you can select that would fit into that category. Passwordless multi-factor authentication, there's a few ways. You can see there's at least 3 there that would meet that category. Phishing resistant MFA, and there's fewer ways that can do that. So when I am going to now prompt for an MFA, maybe initial login, I'm going to have a policy that says, multi-factor authentication is fine. Now I want to touch HR data or finance data. Well, now I'm going to prompt you again, but this one has to be a phishing resistant one. You can't just use SMS for this one. You're going to have to do certificate base or Windows Hello for business or something like that. And that's what the strengths are for. I can build a category, and we'll see that in a minute here. So for instance, multi-factor authentication, you can see there's multiple ways. Do you want a password and SMS, password and voice? Do you want to do passkeys, certificate based? Notice all of these less secure and more secure ones are all in there, but the user can pick any of those. Now they could pick a strong one and still be good, but they could also pick a weak one. And what's showing here, by the way, is what's available over in your allowed login section there. All right, so that's what MF multi-factor would offer. If I go to passwordless, notice that Microsoft is saying, well, here's 4 ways of doing that. And if you're going to require a passwordless level of MFA, these are the 4 things you can choose. And as you move down to phishing resistant, we're getting down to 3. So if you noticed here, we had Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator in passwordless. We do not have it in phishing resistant. So we can now tailor the level of security to the sensitivity of the data that we're trying to protect, or the sensitivity of the resource. And authentication strength is just another filter to do that with. So let's talk about passwordless a little bit. I'm going to swing back to the conditional access policies in a minute, but I just kind of want to walk through what passwordless looks like. Let me get this off the screen here. Okay. All right, so passwordless logins use MFA to eliminate the users from needing to enter passwords. Right. It enhances the security and the user experience because you're eliminating one thing that they need to type on that. Entra ID offers you several ways of doing passwordless. There's the Hello, Authenticator, Passkeys, and Certificate base, and over in the Mac area, there's the Platform Credential and the Platform Single Sign-On opportunities there in the Mac. I can't speak to you about Mac. I haven't done a lot of work there, but the ones above that work in the Windows, these are the ones I'm more familiar with, and we could discuss if necessary if you have questions on that. But these are the technologies Microsoft will use. So let's just walk through how I'm going to walk through a couple different of those strategies, starting with Hello for Business, the Authenticator, and FIDO keys, and just show you how this works for the user. All right, so here, if they're using Hello for Business, the user is going to sign into their Windows using either the biometric key or the PIN gesture that gets them in. And what this does is now unlocks the private key, and it's sent over to the cloud provider. So I've done some gesture that unlocks the key, and it puts it into the cloud provider, which is a service on your PC. All right, so now I have a private key that's only mine that will match a public key that has been put up into Entra that happened upon my registration, okay? But now I have the private key available to me. The Cloud AP then requests a nonce from Entra, and for which it's now returned. And now I get to respond. This nonce is the pop-up of an enter a number or something like that. If I respond correctly, it now takes this private key that it unlocked with the gesture earlier back in step 1, signs that says, yep, this is the person who passed the initial gesture and they passed this nonce challenge. So I'm going to sign it and send it back up. And then Entra will then validate that it has been, that it's correct, and will pass down a token that will let me start gaining access to it. And then it will protect that token for future use. So picture this, I log in with a PIN, I get a nonce, I answer the nonce, I'm in. I didn't have to answer a password or anything, and it's confirmed me. I knew something to get me into the device. Maybe it's even biometric and not a PIN. So it recognized my fingerprint, and then I was able to enter the nonce, which is a proof of presence. Yeah, this is me, it's interactive, I'm answering it. And now, now I can get logged in without a password. So that's how Hello for Business would work. No, okay, I missed a step there. Okay, same thing with the Authenticator. So let's walk down that process real quick. User enters their username. Entra detects that this user now has a strong credential flow. This is something you configure at registration. You're going to register them using strong credential flow. So when I pass the credentials up to Entra, Entra goes, oh, I recognize this as strong credential. So instead of just prompting for password, excuse me, I'm going to go down the strong credential flow. So what happens is it now sends me a notification to my device. That's step 3 here, as you can see. I need to receive it and open it. And then now that I have that opening up of the app will make a call to get a proof of presence challenge and then nonce on that. I can complete that challenge, and then with the completed challenge, my session now gets locked with, signed with my private key and sent back to Entra, for which now I can log in with public private key. So I entered my username and I answered a challenge on my device by opening an app and answering the proof of presence nonce challenge. And now I'm in, and it knows me because it's using my private public key that are only registered to me to do that. So now I'm in passwordlessly. FIDO, so I'm gonna do this with a stick, okay? So I plug the FIDO device into my computer. Once Windows detects that has a detects the FIDO security key, it will send an authentication request to Entra. When Entra sends back a nonce, I have to complete some gesture at that point with the key to unlock my private key on there. So now I've not only done my login or authentication request, but now I'm proving myself by touching the device, for instance, that allows it to now get the private key for signing again. It will then use this to sign the private key, and then I get my I finish my request and get my session token, for which I can then finish my login. So again, I've plugged in a key, I've done some gesture, now I'm logged in. So I've had to have the key, I had to have the proper gesture on that, and it has to be recognized that key is registered to me, and that's the one that gets me logged in. And that's how passwordless looks. These are MFA technologies that tries to get the password out of your environment, right? So let's look at a quick overview, high level, of what that looks like from the user's perspective. We're going to do passwordless with the authentication app. All right, so the first thing that has to happen is I need to make sure that this is enabled for the user. So either all users or the group that I am in. All right, so that has to be there. Then at the user, under authentication methods, I need to add a method and choose the authenticator app or something like that. And then also I want a temporary access password. This is going to help me register the device. Right? Now the user opens up their app. They're going to select their work account. They're going to enter their user ID. They're going to enter that temporary access pass. And now that validates me as the one doing this registration. And now I can register my device with this. Now my device is now going to become my authentication method tool at this, and it's registered to me because not only did I know the user ID, I knew the temporary pass, which would have been given to me in some secure manner. And now my device gets registered to me. And like that, I am now registered. Now, high level, not quite that simple, but relatively simple, especially from a user's perspective. And you can easily send them documentation. You'll see this, answer yes to this. And from that point on, you're using this to log in. And then go back to that flow that I showed you earlier of what passwordless login looks like with those apps. So MFA, to enable MFA in general in Entra, a way to protect your IDs. Security defaults is always an option. This is a very binary option here in that it's going to turn it on for everybody. And people have to register with the authentication, using the authentication methods that you allowed in that other screen that we showed. But it's a form of conditional access policy, but it's applied to all people. So you have that. You still have the per user method where you could go into your user's screen, hit multi-factor authentication, and per user turn on or off multi-factor authentication. Nice for quick testing, you want ones or two, something like that. But it's really not robust. It's very binary. You're either going to prompt every login or you're not going to prompt every login. You can define some trusted subnets, but there's really not a lot of filtering that's going on here. Where Microsoft really wants you to be, and it's really the better place to be, is conditional access policies, because these will not only protect your initial login, but any subsequent login as you move up the chain of sensitivity into your data and resources. So let's just take a quick look at conditional access policies. I'm not going to spend too much time here because we've done this before in other webinars. I just want to point out a couple things as we go through. All right, so in the Entra Admin Center, I'm going to pick conditional access. And in the conditional access policy, as I'm creating a new policy, I can define who this applies to, what it applies to. In other words, trigger this when they're trying to access X, cloud apps, whatever. Right? Are they on a secure network or not a secure network? What other conditions that are we filtering for? And we'll see later, this could be things like, is the device compliant? Is this a risky login or a risky sign-in? Is this a risky user or a risky sign-in? And we'll talk about that in a minute. So these are the conditions on here. But when you go over to grant access, okay, I'm a user and I'm hitting this device and I've met these conditions. What do you want me to do? Well, I want you to grant access, and you can require multi-factor authentication. You can require a strength. All right, yes, I'm going to let you in. Maybe your initial login is going to just do basic multi-factor authentication, and your sensitive data is now going to require some kind of strength, for which I might want to pick phishing resistance or something like that. Notice here, this device must be marked as compliant. Or maybe, depending on what kind of conditions I've met, maybe it's like, I want you to change your password because I didn't like what I saw, type of thing. So these apply not only initially, but at any stage against any target in your environment. When this gets accessed, you can force another authentication to happen to prove that this is the person making the access to these devices. Another tool Microsoft gives you is something called ID protection. This is that risky users, risky sign-ins thing that I mentioned before. And I'm going to drive a little bit into this to let you know what that is. What it does is it helps you detect and investigate and remediate identity risks in your systems, things that you on your own may not be aware of, but Microsoft is monitoring for you. These triggers, and we'll see in a couple future screens here, can be used to trigger conditional access. Hey, normally I just do basic MFA, but all of a sudden I'm starting to look like a risky sign-in. And we'll talk about that in a minute, because maybe I'm coming from an unknown area or something like that. I can now say, I don't like where you're coming from. Let's try something else. Here's another challenge to your authentication. So that's what these are used for. A risky user would be something where there's suspicion of leaked credentials. Microsoft monitors these things. They monitor the dark web and what credentials they're seeing out there, and do they match your credentials? Are you they're recognizing if credentials are coming from known questionable sites. So they're using their threat intelligence and classifying your user ID at some level of risk, low, medium, high. Risky sign-in, on the other hand, this is more of the interactive. Well, you're coming from an anonymous login, or you have very atypical travel. All of a sudden you're logging in from the Philippines when this afternoon you were in Maryland. You have an IP address that has been linked to some malware site or has been seen at a malware site. Other unfamiliar properties, things like that. It will say this login looks a little suspicious, and that's considered a risky sign-in process. So your account can be risky, that's user login, or the particular sign-in can look risky. That has something to do with the conditions where the login is approaching Entra ID. So what we can do with this risky users, risky sign-ins, is we can build policies for these. So you have your user risk policy, you have your sign-in risk policy, and like in any other policy, who's this apply to? What level risk am I concerned about? When do I want to prompt for something extra? Maybe I want to do anything from low to high. You don't want your users to have any risk assigned to it. So maybe there's a low-level risk you want to trigger immediately, or you're only going to worry about if they're considered high-level risk when Microsoft is pretty certain that this account has some questionable aspects to it. Maybe you want to trigger access on these types of things. And then from there, you can allow access, block access, allow access, but require a password change. So you can build these policies to protect yourself against these kinds of accounts coming in. If you have basic licensing, all you'll know is that your users are low, medium, high. That's all you're going to know from Microsoft. If you move up into like the P2 licensing and Entra ID, they'll tell you a little bit about why your user was rated the way they were on that. So we have ID protection. Privileged identity management is another tool Microsoft gives you. This is for your administrative accounts. This provides a time-based, approval-based role activation so that your accounts no longer need to be full-time Exchange admins. They only become Exchange admins when they need to become Exchange admins. So if the account is ever compromised, it doesn't have all the permissions that it would that it would have as an administrator, because those things need to be granted. So you've minimized the damage, if you will, if that particular account gets compromised. I still recommend you have separate admin accounts and then attach privileged identity management to them. Don't be using your day-to-day accounts. All right, so the roles, instead of being assigned, are assigned as eligible so that you can activate them as need be. So it provides you just-in-time privilege access. So when you ask for it, that's when you get it. Time-bound, you get it for as long as you've requested and no more. It does require approval, and the approval can be interactive or it can be automated. Now, how does automated help? Well, it still starts logging what you're doing. So you still have to have an approval process. You can enforce multi-factor authentication just by the fact that someone's trying to elevate. You can require them to provide justification. You want an increase in permissions? Tell me what you're doing and why. And that, again, gets written into the log. All right. And you can get notifications of these. So again, you're signing assignments to people. Again, eligible or active is one of your choices. When does it start? When does it stop? The user, when trying to activate, can say, here's how long I want it. Here's what I'm using it for, et cetera. So you have all this information for forensics as well as filters for why you might want to approve or disapprove of particular applications. So interactive or automated, I've mentioned that. Users can ask for extensions. Protected access actions. Now, I put this in here because it's conditional access, but it's really, it can be a layer on top of. It's not protecting a credential, it's protecting an action. So you have these actions that you can do. Deleted items, you want to delete these things, or you want to create these things, or whatever. These are actions that you can do. And we can put a conditional access policy against these so that you can check again. Yes, I know you just elevated yourself to Exchange Administrator, but you want to delete something. So let's ask again. So this is what this will let you do, is put additional protection on an action using a conditional access policy. So how that happens is, in the conditional access, you're going to be creating something called authentication contexts. These are nothing more than tags that you're going to apply to an action. All right, so you create a new policy. My target then is this tag, this name I've created. All I've done is create names, and here they are over here again. And then when you go to do an action, it will have a name associated with it, a tag associated with it. And now, when I go to do this action, which has this name, I now start running the conditional access policy, which is, here's my target, here's my network, what are my conditions, and out of the screen, but down here is, what do you want me to do about it? Grant, block, whatever. All right, so we have protected actions, which uses conditional access. So It's from a standard account, elevated through privileged identity management. For this particular item, this particular action, I want to ask again before you do it. So we can put protected actions into the system as well. Directory synchronization and SSO. We many times think of SSO and directory synchronization for convenience, but it really has a lot of security implications to it. It can help you reduce the sprawl of accounts that you have to manage across the systems. You can have a master directory that populates all the subdirectories using the SCIM protocol, so you only have to manage from one point. So you have that capability. Using Entra Connect or the Cloud Sync tool, you can synchronize your on-premises with Entra ID. You can synchronize hashes if you want. So if you still want to use passwords, the password hash from AD will be brought up to the Entra ID, and authentication can fully occur in Entra ID or Azure AD in this diagram. I have to change that name because it has a password associated with it. Just happens to be the hash that came up from AD. So if I just want to have the same credentials in one place or another, I can do that option. So I can have password hash. I could do pass-through authentication, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But basically what that's saying is I want you to start the authentication in Entra ID, but check with AD to validate the password because the password won't be in Entra ID. I can federate, which means you're saying which directory will be used to authenticate, and the other directory will just trust it. Okay, so these are the options that we get. And then we can also turn on single sign-on for AD joined devices on your network. Okay, so these are the options to be given. We have password write-back capabilities, so that if I change my password in the password reset tool up here, it can come back down to my AD. So we only have to have one tool right here. All right. And that's what the screens would look like. Pass-through authentication, I've already mentioned what that was. I'll just briefly say again, what's happened is you're not sending passwords to Entra ID, you're leaving them on AD, and your login to Entra ID checks with AD to make sure the password is correct. Seamless single sign-on or for on-premises devices. I'm starting to get a little short of time, so I'm going to move through this. We've done some presentations on this before, and I want to make sure I'm leaving some room. But the single sign-on, I will say this: the single sign-on, what it's doing is it's trusting your AD login with this Kerberos certificate. There's a computer object that gets created that's going to generate the Kerberos, and that will be used for the authentication up in Entra. So I've pulled the authentication down here in AD, and Entra ID will trust it now. Okay, so that's a security element as well. The Entra single sign-on. Now we had single sign-on. Let me back that up a little bit here. We had single sign-on from AD to Entra ID. There is also single sign-on from Entra ID out to third-party applications. These would be your SaaS applications, most likely, that would be out there. Entra ID supports two types of single sign-on. One of them truly is there for single sign-on, called password vaulting. Entra ID stores the passwords for these third-party apps in the user's account so that when they go to access that site, the password is just passed over and the authentication still takes place out of the third-party application because the user ID and a password has been sent, but it's just in an automated fashion. So this is a convenience for the user, not a security feature. The SAML approach means the authentication happens in Entra ID and a token is passed to the third-party app. So authentication has been pulled back here to Entra ID, meaning that if someone leaves your business and you disable their account, they can't log into the third-party app because it's trusting Entra ID. What if you'd forgotten to go out there to your accounting app and disable that account? Well, that's still a live account from someone maybe you terminated who's not happy with you. who still has access to your data. So SAML is a security tool, and you always want to go down the SAML path whenever you can, all right, which is common. You can generally do that. So this is where single sign-on from Entra ID to your third-party apps is a security feature. I don't have a slide on it, but there's a protocol called SCIM, S-C-I-M, that Entra ID supports. And if your third-party app also supports it, when you create an account in Entra ID, it will automatically create or delete or whatever the action is in the third-party app. So you could have create account in AD, let it synchronize to Azure AD, and if you had all the right attributes set for that account, it would trigger the SCIM and create accounts in the third-party apps that you need to create it in, that are linked in here. And reverse, I disable it in AD, it disables it in Entra ID, disables it out in the third-party apps. And now you've secured your accounts in all these other locations that are not on your premises, but it's your data and your user IDs that are out there. And there's the SCIM. I should have probably realized that was on its way. Okay, where you see this is in the enterprise applications of the Entra Admin Center. These are the apps for which you have built connections to for things. If you want to add a new one, you have two options. You can go to the gallery, and Microsoft has a large selection of applications for which the parameters you need to make that connections are already predefined. So you don't have to go research what you need to make these kinds of connections. It starts that process for you. So you only need to go to the third-party app, and it tells you what you need to set there, and you should make a connection. If there isn't something in the gallery, you can create your own application. And when you do, you get prompted as to whether you want to use SAML for it, and then you need to find out what the SAML parameters are. Or do you want to do it this password vaulting method? And all you would need to do there is capture what the login screen looks like on the other side. So it recognizes, oh, for this screen, I send this password. Again, not a security issue. SAML's where your security is. But this is where we're now taking our security of our accounts from AD up to Entra ID, and we're pushing them out to third-party devices. Many of us are starting to use SaaS applications. Vendors are pushing people there. They really are convenient. They're keeping you up to date on features. SaaS applications will be around. This is a way to protect those IDs so that you have control and you don't forget to undo things. That's really where your security can be a problem. You're going to leave accounts lingering in sites, that have access to your data, because, our perimeter has changed. It's grown way out there now into all kinds of data centers. We have things in the cloud. We may have things in colos. We may have things on premises. We have things on our SaaS applications. We have things on our devices. These are just some of the tools you can use for certain things to be protecting your accounts in other locations. Monitoring. I'm just going to cover a couple things real quick here, and that's about all we're going to have time for today. In the Admin Center, this is under your health and monitoring. This is where you can take a look at your sign-in logs, and you can see who's signing in, from where, etc. Audit logs will tell you, again, what was done, when was, what was done, update application, where in the core directory, under application management, when was it done, etc. What your general health log looks like, sign-ins requiring compliant devices, sign-ins requiring managed devices, sign-ins requiring MFA and others. These are scenario monitoring here. And the dashboard will give you more as well. So you can kind of just see what's happening in your environment. And of course, usages and insights tells you a little bit more about your environment, how many successful logins to this, that, or the other thing you've had, how many failed sign-ins, view the activities of it. Now, all of these logs can be pulled together with log analytics and other monitoring tools, to your SIM and things like that, so that you can be building dashboards with notifications when these happen. So yes, you can explicitly go out to the sign-in logs, the audit logs, things like that. Or you can be building these things to feed into log analytics or some other tool to tell you about what's happening proactively, so that you're not having to go every day into this and look at, I just showed three or four logs here. So you don't need to do this every day to 3 or 4 logs. Go to where you've collated them together and built a dashboard with log analytics. It shows you all of these things in one pane of glass, so you can be monitoring these things. And if for certain actions, for certain concerns, notifications can come out of those. We covered this in a previous webinar, I think 2 back, where we talked about how to use log analytics to build these dashboards. All right, so what have we discussed today? We've discussed passwords and Microsoft's new standards for those and their weaknesses, and we talked a little bit about some passwordless logins and how that works. We talked about password protection that sets your policies for custom banned words and block out times, things like that, and how it can connect into your AD. We talked about authentication strength as a group, if you will, that defines levels of MFA that have different levels of strength, everything from passwordless strength to anti-phishing strength, et cetera, and how to use conditional access, not just for initial login, but for access to resources. And then if you remember, those protected actions use conditional access as well. So not only have my account been checked a couple times along the way, but it will be verified again when a particular action is being done. So we talked about that. Identity protection. This is your risky user, risky sign-in. And now you have insight that from Microsoft's monitoring as to what do your accounts look like and how risky are they. Privileged identity management, where you take and elevate your account to administrator level only when you need it, and then it goes away again, so the account is not at risk. The ramifications of a compromise are not as great because the account is not always elevated. Protected actions, I just mentioned that earlier on conditional access. We talked about that. We talked about how directory synchronization and SSO can help you with security of your IDs, especially as you move outside of your Entra ID world. And that which is the SSO here. All right. What we didn't discuss, there's several things, because identity is a big topic. We didn't discuss, using QR code for login with your frontline workers. We didn't discuss passkeys or certificate-based authentication or business-to-business or business-to-consumer identity management, managing external identities, zero trust models, automating your lifecycle management. All these things we didn't talk about, but we will talk about them in July. In July, this is April. So next month, we're doing infrastructure security in Azure. In June, we're doing storage security in Azure, where we're going to talk about not only securing access to the storage, but the various different encryptions that you can configure and use in Azure. And then in July, we're going to come back to identity and deal with the things we didn't cover today, which, the bullets you're seeing on the screen now will probably be what the content will be for that webinar. So the next 3 months now, we got yet more security to go. And again, we're going to revisit and cover more identity by July. And with that, I'm at the end of my material. So Chris, do you want to jump back in here?
Yeah, so just finishing up here, this will be in your deck, and these are clickable links as well when you get that. So there are some classes from Azure Fundamentals up through some much more technical topics that may be beneficial for you, and we've attached some discounts along those for some of that training. All these are also available remotely as well, so from wherever you may be located. So that will be in your deck. And then finally, we appreciate your time today as well as Dave's and for the information. The only question, I only had 2 questions, and that was for a gentleman that had to scoot a little bit early, so we'll contact him afterwards for his questions. But there will be a number of resources offered in the evaluation, which you'll see for some things that may be helpful to you. So you can let us know what you might like, and we'll keep it fun for the $50 Amazon gift card from the completed evaluations. As we appreciate your time letting us know how we did and also how we can continue to resource you. Thank you again, everyone. Hope you have a great afternoon.